yan, mga kamusta? Wala na. Sablay na pagpasok pa lang. Ito. Marami tayong pag-usapan today, guys. Sorry, hindi tayo nag-dehydrate. Actually, initially gusto kong pag-usapan itong game natin tomorrow. Basketball for the G. For the gold na sana tayo tomorrow. Hoping, wishing the best for Gilas, Pilipinas. But let's leave that for tomorrow. No, I was hoping siguro ang gagawin namin bukas is we'll do a pre-game kind of analysis and then we'll do a post-game analysis. Kasama din natin yung mga tao na may konting alam naman sa basketball. No, so we're gonna talk about that. But today, I just wanted to go back to itong mga latest developments since the release of the Pulse Asia survey, which in many ways has been nothing short of a political earthquake, because ang situation na meron tayo ngayon is we have a president who got more votes and at the same time a greater share of votes than any Filipino president in recent memory. The last time we got someone who won close to 60% of the votes was panahon pa ni Marcos Sr. No? Depending on how you're gonna count whether valid yung re-election niya in the late 1960s or not. Mahabang usapan yan. I discussed the details of that dun sa isang Journal of Democracy article ko about the return of the Marcos dynasty. But anyway, for someone who won close to 60% of the votes, to have an approval rating of just over 60% with margin of error of plus or minus 3 to 5, medyo alanganin yan. So that means the president actually right now has an approval rating which is far lower than both President Benigno Aquino, who was at this point in his presidency at around 77% approval rating, and also lower than President Digong, who was at around 80% approval rating at this point in time. So clearly, by all indications, the honeymoon is over. No, I think there were some people who thought na since ang laki ng panalo nung 2022 elections, the honeymoon will be as long as the honeymoon of Digong. Kasi kung titingnan natin si Digong, ang haba ng honeymoon niya, no? Ang taas na approval rating niya. The only time that he saw a significant or double-digit decrease in his numbers was during the Kian de los Santos, of course, nationwide uproar. But we saw that immediately Duterte tried to damage control by meeting the family members, suspending the operations, the Tokang operations, at least temporarily, and doing his best to appease, no? Mga taong bayan, to reassure them, investors, Filipinas, etc. So, but through and through, Digong was able to maintain very high approval ratings. Ito nga, second year pa lang, heading pa lang into first, second quarter of second year, we see a significant double-digit decrease in the numbers of both the number one and the number two. Of course, number one had 15% drop in his numbers in the first half of September. Maybe the numbers are slightly better or not by the second half of September. And then the number two in the country, Sara Duterte, had an 11-point drop in her numbers. Not as much as BBM, because katulad ng na-analyze natin earlier this week, si BBM kasi ang laki nung drop niya, 29% if I'm not mistaken, among Class E. Ito yung mga pinakamahirap natin at underprivileged natin ng mga kababayan. At of course, silang pinaka-apektado, no? Doon sa pagtaas ng presyo ng mga basic na bilhin, no? Especially bigas. No? So even a single peso increase can have significant impact on their livelihood and everyday quality of life. Kay Sara, of course, we didn't see as much decrease in her numbers among Class E, but both Sara Duterte and BBM saw significant drops, both I think above 20%, 22% if I'm not mistaken in the case of BBM, among Class ABC. Well, luckily for them, both ABC and E are relatively small portion of the entire electorate, because the majority, I think close to 60%, between 55 to 60%, I think, of our entire electorate are Class D. No, yung quote-unquote masa. And among the masa, the drop was not as significant. Kaya nga, it's 11 to 15%, not 20%, 25%. No? Kasi kung tinignan mo lang E lang, or ABC, lampas na sa 20% yung drop ni BBM, which would have been crazy in historical terms. So, siguro ibang episode na analyze natin bakit dun sa D, hindi ganun ka-significant yung drop. We can have a separate discussion on that. And next week, actually, interviewin din natin yung my former colleague, Dr. Ronald Holmes, of course, is the boss there sa Pulse Asia. So we will discuss Pulse Asia, we will discuss the methodology behind it, we'll discuss the science behind it, what is random sampling, how do you make sure, kasi hindi census po ang mga surveys na yan, di ba? You're not supposed to survey 108 million Filipinos, right? These are random sampling, representative samples ang dapat hanapin mo. So we'll discuss the science behind the science, yung mga nagluluto. We'll discuss the science behind surveys. Now, speaking of surveys, and speaking of science, speaking of education and public education, interestingly, narinig ko ngayon na biglang medyo yung iba kasama natin dyan, yung mga influencers, mga thought leaders, medyo sobrang excited na gumamit ng Pulse Asia ngayon, di ba? Wow, talaga. If I'm not mistaken, these are the very people that last year, actually, not long ago, we're bashing Pulse Asia and questioning its integrity and regurgitating all sorts of salacious, libelous, nonsensical stuff against Ronald Holmes and our friends in Pulse Asia. Again, you can disagree with Pulse Asia but provide us a scientific counter-argument. But ibang usapan na pag medyo libelous and salacious na. Di ba? Buti nga mabait sila Ronald. Hindi sila lumaban na the way they could have. At I'm still waiting for public apology from some of these self-proclaimed intellectuals and charlatans out there who are super happy now to quote and cite Pulse Asia when not long ago they were bashing Pulse Asia and questioning its credibility. Of course, now dahil ang laki ng baba ng baksak sa numbers ni BBM and Sara, especially BBM, tuwan-tuwa sila bigla at cite nila yung Pulse Asia. Now, obviously, alam ko anong isi-spin nila dyan. No, if we had, I know what they're gonna say, but the point is konting self-awareness naman dyan. At sana naman mag-apologize yung iba dyan kay Ronald Holmes at saka yung mga tao na matino dyan sa Pulse Asia. Konting respeto naman, di ba? Anyway, hindi pwede kasi ganito di ba? Na isi-side mo lang yung survey pag it serves your purpose and then ibabash mo yung buong hindi lang survey, the whole agency behind it, questions integrity when it's not going your way. Hindi naman pwedeng ganon. Now, if you have alternative surveys na more reliable and it shows a very different picture than yung ibang usapan niyan. But anyway, don't worry about it. We will discuss the science behind surveys, especially Pulse Asia quality surveys, hindi yung mga ibang kunyari survey agency, pero alam natin consultancy agency lang. Hindi yung mga ganun hindi yung mga operator apparatchik types. Legit, no? So actually, if you look at the really two established ones, it's SWS and Pulse Asia. So si Sir Mangar Mahangas naman, si Dr. Mahangas naman is a very good friend of ours. We're together columnists at the Philippine Daily Inquirer. I'm hoping to have more conversations with him. But in the meantime, I'm thinking, kasi Pulse Asia yung pinaka-prominent because they're consistently coming up with surveys right and left. Meron din pala survey on senatorial slate. Base dun sa nakita ko, mukhang si Erwin Tulfo. Isa na naman Tulfo ang number one, potentially topping the Senate race unless may isa pang Robin Hood Padilla naman ang lalabas. Katulad ni Robin Hood. But anyway, we will discuss that. Alright? We'll discuss the survey soon. Don't worry about it. Balikan natin yan. Okay. Oo nga, no. Tuloy yung mga nag-type ng dilawan, naging biglang na kayo, na auto-censor yata kayo ng Facebook, Then, guys, Brazilian! Ano ba naman kayo? Brazil! Neymar! Fiesta Festival! Yan. Brazil tayo, guys. Brazil tayo ngayon. Sporty sana tayo. Bigyan, naalala ko, bukas pala pwede natin pag-usapan yung Asia Games. But, tinamad na ako palitan ito. Sige, atake niyo ako ng Pero ito naman, kulay naman nila Sara, di ba? Nung election, yung green. Oh, di ba? Di ba? Ayan. Okay. Ito. Balikan natin ito. Okay. So, I think what's really interesting here is not only what the surveys said, but what was said about the surveys by the people who had the highest stake when it comes to survey, right? Essentially the most important, the highest elected officials of the land. Now, before going to Mick Zubiri and then going to BBM and then going to Sara Duterte, pag-usapan muna natin mga kamets, no? Mga kamets, mga kahays. Pag-usapan muna natin itong isa pang survey na hindi ko pinakita. So actually, 3 survey na lumabas over the week. Talagang bibo talaga tong Pulse Asia. Wait, 1 second lang Okay. So ito pa yung isa na hindi natin na-discuss last time. Okay. So ito pa yung urgency, no? Yung mga issues by urgency at saka yung approval. So katulad ng sinabi natin, by far, ang issue po ng inflation ay pinakamahalaga sa ating mga mamamayan. 70 plus percent, I think 77, 79%, ang taas, 74%, sorry, 74% ay nagsasabi na pinakamahalaga sa kanila siya ng inflation, followed by significant lower, followed by wages, followed by employment, and then medyo malayo na yung iba yung corruption, etc. Katulad ng sinabi natin, no, corruption is not as big as an issue for voters as it was before. I'm not saying it's not important to voters, but there are levels to this. No. Now, pag tinignan mo dito, case by case basis, medyo, kung ikaw si BBM, hindi ka matuwa. Diba? Because on many of the issues actually, nagkaroon ng either not significant yung improvement or even nagkaroon ng reversals. But the most important one here is controlling inflation. So kung titingnan niyo sa baba, 31% lang nag-approve dun sa management of inflation by the president or by the administration. And to consider, more than 7 out of 10 Filipinos consider controlling inflation as the most important issue. Okay? So only 31% say that tama yung pag-handle sa inflation issue. Again, we had a separate discussion. I had an article when I explained, in fairness, may mga reason na tumaas pa yung presyo ng bigas or pataas pa rin yung inflation sa food inflation because of international market events. But ginamit na kasing reason na yan last year dun sa Ukraine conflict. So you cannot keep on blaming international factors. And of course, there's a domestic factor that we'll also explain shortly. 27% lang. So barely 1 out of 5 Filipinos said approve nila how the government is handling the inflation issue. Right? So more people are disapproving. More people, the approving is 31%, sorry. Disapproval is 42%, sorry. Okay, 42%. Yan kasi, nasobra ng kape. Disapproval is 42%, approval is 31%, undecided is 27%. So that gives you a net negative 11%. Right? Approval on the most important issue by more than 70%. Right? So for more than 70% of the Filipino voters, inflation is a top issue. And then, when people are asked kung approve niyo yung ginagawa ng gobyerno, 31% said yes. That's less than a third. But 42% said no. So that gives you a negative 11% net approval on the most important issue to the voters by far. Interestingly, mukhang there's a different table there that actually shows comparison to the previous quarter. Mukhang nag-improve pa yung score ng administration on dealing with corruption. I don't know. I'm not exactly sure how. Siguro dahil yung Maharlika Fund medyo inayos. I don't know. Kaya nga sometimes I'm saying like you have to really interrogate qualitatively itong mga surveys na ito, no? And these are legit surveys. But the numbers have to be qualified. So yung mga nagsasabi na numbers speak for themselves, well, actually, no. Numbers have to be put into a certain context, di ba? Kasi kung sabihin mo, ang galing ng bansang to, 10% yung growth niya, and then you forget to say, 10% ng growth niya this year kasi negative 20% yung growth niya last year. If you don't put it in the context, then wala rin, di ba? So numbers alone don't say anything. You have to put them into a certain context, right? Now, so if you're BBM, you're looking at it, like, okay, we have good net approval on many other issues. In fact, personally, alam niyo naman stance ko, I think the president has done a pretty good job on dealing with West Philippine Sea issue and foreign policy compared at least kay Digong. And in fairness, this is the very interesting thing. Even if si BBM adopted a more humane, modern, non-bara-bara approach dun sa drug war, sa criminality, ang taas pa rin yung kanyang net approval rating, no? So kung titignan mo, isa sa mga pinakamataas na approval sa kanya, yung mga galing sa mga OFWs natin. No surprise, marami sa kanila, yung mga followers natin, di ba? Mga ka-BBMs! Yan. And then, of course, dun sa, ito. Ang taas din ng kanyang score sa fighting criminality and also promoting peace. Ang taas, plus 62, plus 50, ang taas. Ang taas niya. So even if hindi siya kasing bara-bara style ng Digong, mataas pa rin ang approval sa kanya. Pero dito talaga, yung dun sa pinakamahalagang issue which is controlling inflation, dito na da. But, what's interesting is the response that President Marcos Jr. gave. The response that President Marcos Jr. gave was this: naintindihan ko kayo. It's completely normal. Hindi daw siya surprised. I understand. Sabi niya, naintindihan ko bakit hindi natuwang tao. Overall, dahil dun sa mga pinakamahalagang issue, especially itong inflation and all, things are not moving in the right direction. So this is the very interesting thing. So when faced with and not so, inspiring survey, not devastating because he still has 60+% approval rating. I mean, but still, it's the trend line, di ba? Despite the fact that he was faced by something like that, tingnan niyo naman response. Ang response ni Pangulo Marcos Jr., I want to actually use sana itong video kaso magkakaroon tayo ng problema pa mon. Baka masira yung copyright issue natin. Anyway, so the president essentially said, let me use the exact quote, but I'll post the link sa baba, mga kameta. Don't worry about it. Ipopost natin sa baba yung link para makita niyo exact the whole speech given by the president. So you see how the president, somber, and it was very clear that he's absorbing the moment. He's understanding what message, ano yung mensahe na sinisend sa kanya ng ating kababayan. Ito yung sinabi niya, not surprising, no? At sabi niya, he completely understands bakit hindi natuwa ng tao. So, ito yung diba? So, this is the kind of response that we saw from BBM. Now, more than that, interestingly, katulad ng pinag-usapan natin ni Paring Ronald Llamas kahapon, President Marcos Jr. also moved on multiple fronts. So, one of the things that President Marcos Jr. did was, nagsampa na sila ng kaso. So, instead of going down the same road as last year to say, hindi, dahil yan sa international markets, dahil yan sa mga export controls na imposed ng India, etc. Okay, actually, that's factually correct, no? But he didn't go na down that road kasi alam niya hindi gagana yung mga ganitong explanation no matter how valid they are, right? Instead, what he did was go on the offensive and nag-name na sila ng smugglers and hoarders. So President Marcos Jr. right now is taking the advice of Mig Zubiri. Because si Senator Mig Zubiri, bumaba rin yung numbers niya. I think from around 57 to 50%. So sabi niya, nako, lahat na tayo sinisisi na sa gobyerno. Ayusin natin yan. So sabi niya, crack the whip na. So medyo magtapang style na tayo. So yun yung advice na kay President Marcos Jr. So President Marcos Jr. has responded accordingly. He felt the call of the moment. And now, eto na. Nagsampa na sila ng kaso laban sa mga alleged hoarders, and smugglers who have been artificially keeping the price very, very high. So Ferdinand Marcos Jr. on Wednesday named number of individuals and institutions involved in allegedly manipulating the rice situation sa local markets. So Marcos identified these groups during his speech sa isang rice distribution event sa Taguig City, no? San Pedro Warehouse, Blue Sakura Agri Grain Corporation, FS Ostia Rice Mill, Gold Rice Mill. Yan. So, ito yung mga pinangalan nila. Again, this is alleged. So, we have to still see what will be the investigations and saan ba mapunta ito. So, the government has slapped them with complaints in violation of the Custom Modernization and Tariff Act, the Rice Tarification Law, and the Agricultural Smuggling Act of 2016, Republic Act number 10845. No? Ayon sa ating presidente, they will face multiple charges for their wrongdoing. Sila ay kasalukuyan haharap sa patong-patong ng mga kaso dahil sa kanilang mga ginawa. Okay, so the president is cracking the whip. So medyo tapang mode na si BBM na ngayon, di ba? I mean, this is the thing We hindi natin kailangang tapang na bara-bara tatay style, but we need some sort of decisive measure against people who are really abusing the system at the expense of the Filipino people and at the expense of the welfare of our nation. So good move, good move. Maganda yan. Isa pa, there are also now discussions that, tinanggal na rin yung rice price cap, rice price cap, dahil hindi talaga kakana yan. Binash-bash yan ng mga economists. Many economists correctly question whether these things are work. Medyo mga Soviet Union style na yan. Maybe in some emergency situations, yes, but katulad nga sinabi ng Balisakan, if you really want to deal with the price problem, you have to deal with the supply issue, and kasama then, of course, is also deal with the hoarders and manipulators of supply, no? So the price cap, hindi talaga siya gumana at it doesn't economically make sense, and maraming mga business groups na nainis yan. So tinatanggal din yan, so we see adjustment. But the other one is there are increasingly suggestions that President Marcos Jr. may soon appoint a new uh, agriculture secretary, but the name that is coming out has been met by, put it nicely, mixed reactions. Um, so hindi na so kanina tinanggi ng Malacanang yung mga reports sa billionario.com yata yun. So we're still waiting for, blue chip, media to report on this. But ayon sa Malacanang, they would not confirm reports that President Marcos is eyeing fishing tycoon Francisco Tiu Laurel Jr. Related ba ito dun sa isang okay, not confirmed, sabi ni Communications Secretary Cheloy Garafil, but some people told Billionaire.com that Laurel, who owns the Frabel group of companies, supposedly has the qualities Marcos has been looking for in a DA chief. I don't know. Some people were debate about that. Kasi, honestly, I'd rather have someone like Arsenio Balisacan, who actually has a background sa agriculture economics, and someone who has a background at the highest level of government multiple times, and someone who has dealt with agriculture issue, including from his home province of Ilocos Norte. You can check my interview, my long interview with him last year when I was with GMA Network back then, about his background, his policies, etc. before his assumption, right as he was about to transition into the new NEDA secretary under the Marcos Jr. administration naman. Or, actually, to be even more interesting about it, why not even, people like Francis Pangilinan? Why not someone like him, diba? After all, if you look at Senator Pangilinan, he's someone who had an experience in dealing with agriculture issues. In the early years of the Aquino administration, he was involved in agriculture issues as a senator of the Republic. He was active on issues that had to do with food security. And in fairness to him, diba? So, ito Presidential Assistant for Food Security, diba? Yun yata yung position niya nun, diba? So he worked in the Aquino administration in executive position as secretary. Ito lalabas natin. So he worked in the Department of Agriculture. I'm trying out to bring out the exact title, etc. So he was involved dun sa food security and agriculture modernization issues. Although, of course, ito yung mga malalim na problema ito eh. So you cannot do it in a few years. Of course, he was back in the Senate. But when he ran for the vice president's position, Senator Pangilinan was very much someone who focused dun sa welfare ng ating mga magsasaka, sa issue ng mga magsasaka. And in fact, if you go to his personal page, if you look at his policy platform ng election last year, super active siya. And my sense is, in fairness naman, I mean, I need to properly talk to him, etc. But my sense is quite a smart person who understands the basics and what's needed there. And katulad ng sinabi namin the other day, with parang Ronald Llamas, birthday boy Ronald Llamas, it also makes political sense to have someone from the other side in your administration, because once you create what I call a grand coalition, you change the narrative, you change the conversation, you signal your willingness to go across the aisle, to move across the political spectrum, to pierce through partisanship, and look for the best people who can serve the country. And in theory, at the very in theory, I think someone like Francis Pangilinan would have been a very interesting choice, no? As a agriculture secretary. I mean, he's someone who has been a senator for quite some time. He has his gravitas. Hindi ko alam pala, tangkat pala niya, no? Kasi, nung isang month na we bump into each other, medyo matangkat pala siya, no? I mean, in fairness, may dating, diba? Tsaka matalino, diba? So, I don't know, for me it would have been interesting. Perhaps even more interesting than having someone like Mar Rojas in the cabinet. I mean, I said that Mar Rojas, DTI secretary, even as foreign secretary could make sense, but even more sensible perhaps, if BBM is gonna go down that road, even more sensible would be appointing someone like Francis Pangilinan. So, yun lang. Kasi, pag inappoint mo si Francis Pangilinan, it signals two things immediately. You're willing to pierce through partisan divides and fault lines, and reach out even to your opponents and rivals in the past. And at the same time, you're putting merit before connections and sino sumuporta sa'yo nung election time. At least, as I said, on paper at least, Francis Pangilinan, in my opinion, has the merit, diba? To take up a position, a difficult position like that. Because the thing with the Department of Agriculture is that hindi lang siya, hindi lang siyang talino eh. Kailangan mo rin ng political will, no? Kailangan mo rin ng political capital, kailangan mo ng gravitas. But obviously, ang problema naman ngayon is, medyo malapit ng 2025 election, and I won't be surprised that Senator Kiko is perhaps looking at going back to the Senate, no? Although, we can have a different conversation. Nung tinignan ko naman yung surveys, I'm not sure how sure shot it would be pag tumakbo ulit siya sa Senate. No, it would be a tough fight. So, kasi medyo pangit tignan if papasok siya ngayon, again, this is very hypothetical, papasok siya ngayon, and then wala pang 1 year, mag-resign siya, tapos tatakbo siya ang senador. Ano yung parang revolving door lang. So, I don't think that's gonna look good, no, if ever. I mean, again, I doubt this will happen, but if ever it goes down that road, parang weird. And kaya nga, I'm also hoping that Gibo doesn't run for Senate. Kasi unang-una, kung tignan mo yung surveys, alanganin siya eh. He's barely in the top 20 dun sa surveys nakita ko. And I think he's a good guy to be in the Department of Defense. Baka pwede siya tumakbo sa 2028 na lang. I think it will be great for him to serve at the highest level in the cabinet for something very important for the West Philippines, etc. And natatakbo siya later. So ako naman, if Kiko doesn't have a plan to run for Senate again in 2025, or things are looking a little bit tricky, I think he should be open to becoming Department of Agriculture Secretary. Now, is BBM offering him that? I'm not sure. I don't think so, right? Kasi nga, pinag-usapan natin earlier this year, kasama natin si La Sherda, no, na I said, on the spot, on air, tinanong ko, because, he knows more of us. Is there an offer to Mar for any position? DTI or DFA? Sabi niya, wala. Base sa alam niya. So, I don't know, siguro mga marites lang yan. But again, we're discussing this from a political strategy point of view. No, I think from a political strategy point of view, it would be very sensible to seriously consider someone like Francis Pangilinan as the Department of Agriculture. It sends the right message. It also could be arguably a very merit-based kind of appointment, considering that the Department of Agriculture is not only about economics background, it's also about political capital and gravitas. But also, more important, it changes the narrative. So politically, it also makes sense for BBM. Yung mga nagda-troll sa atin diyan. Okay? I'm sorry. Francis Pangilinan has a far better track record, than a lot of, I don't know, tycoons or businessmen who may be, in consideration for some top cabinet position, to be honest about it. Okay? All right. Now, finally, na-set up na natin yung discussion. Lahat yan ay prologue lang po yan. Now, let's go to the discussion proper. Now, of course, for me, what really was interesting to me, it was how the contrast between how Marcos Jr. responded to the criticisms, or rather to the message that the service were sending, which is, hindi po kami natutuwa sa management niyo ng inflation. Sobrang laki yung baksak ng numbers na overall, particularly among Class E Filipinos and also ABC Filipinos. More than 20% in both classes. Yun lang, swerte lang siya na Class D, ang pinakamalaki, at hindi yun ang steady pa rin numbers niya relatively, no. The thing is, again, you see Marcos Jr. took the signal in a constructive manner. No, sabi niya, I hear you, and I'm gonna do something about this. I'm not gonna take it against you. I'm gonna do something about this. Let's look at what policies we can do. Let's look at what potentially someone else who could be instead of me in the Department of Agriculture. And of course, the other thing I didn't mention is, mas maganda rin for BBM not to be the Department of Agriculture Secretary, because he's gonna be directly blamed, right? Hindi lang as a president, but as the Department of Agriculture Secretary. Right? So when you put all of these things into consideration, it looks like at this Marcos in principle is accepting that something has to be done. We have to go after the hoarders. We have to look at the new Agriculture Secretary. Forget about the rice price cap. We have to do something about it. So yun. Now, contrast that dito sa response ni Sara Duterte dun sa mga kritisismo laban sa kanya, particularly over the confidential fund issue. Now, just to be fair, let's look at the full context of what the vice president said, no? Let's look at the full context, right? Okay, so because words like insidious motivations, things like kalaban ng bayan, yung mga ganyan na nagamit, no? So, let's be fair and let's look at the full context of the quote. So, let's look at the full quote and then the full context of the quote, right? O, di ba? Mabait tayo. Kahit nakadilaw ako, kahit naka-Brazil tayo, Neymar! Yan, mga, ay, ayoko nang pala kay Neymar kasi ano siya pro-Bolsonaro. Walang yan. Ito. Ilabas natin yan. O, para makita niyo on your own, di ba? Fair naman tayo mga ka-Mets. I just wanted you guys to see the contrast, no? The contrast in terms of responses. And keep in mind, mas malaki pa yung baksak yung number ng isa kaysa dito. So, Vice President Sara Duterte and our Department of Agriculture Secretary, by the way, of course, nakalimutan kong sabihin, Happy Teachers Day. Of course, I'm very proud, that I come from a family of teachers. My mom is a teacher. I'm a teacher. I've had the pleasure of teaching, in the leading universities in the country. I've had many great students that I'm happy about. May mga pasaway here and there, but I'm super happy. So yeah, happy to my fellow teachers and to professors and academics out there. It's a thankless and difficult job. Now, speaking of our Department of Agriculture Secretary, I don't know about her experience as a guru. Has she ever taught? Anyway, sabi niya, okay, so dinefend niya yung kanyang proposed confidential funds for security, saying that anyone who attacks the funds has, quote, insidious motivations. During the 122nd Police Service Anniversary of Philippine National Police Regional Office 13, Duterte said on Wednesday that confidential funds play a role in security. Ito kunin ko yung exact quote ano tayo dito, legit tayo dito, hindi tayo katulad ng mga experts sa structuralism. Mga nile-lecture tayo based on Wikipedia copy-paste. Yung mga hindi pa nag-basics dyan. Ito. Okay, ito. Ito yung quote ni Sara. Quote ni Sara. Vice President. Okay. Sabi niya, ito. Sabi niya, anyone who attacks or undermines funds allocated for peace and order is naturally, this is important, is naturally assumed to have insidious motivations. That's interesting. Don't worry, okay, we will break this down. Let's just read it as it is. Anyone who attacks or undermines funds allocated for peace and order is naturally assumed to have insidious motivations. Such actions go against the protection and well-being of our citizenry. Those who seek to compromise the security and development of our nation jeopardize the very fabric of our society and hinder our progress. Okay, so very Tatay Digong ang dating dito, okay. Ito mas interesting pa itong second part na ito Okay, fair tayo Ayan, we'll put the full quote here and then you read it on your own. And then we're gonna analyze it, okay? So again, keep in mind, what did BBM say when he saw service? Sabi niya, I understand, I'm not surprised. Okay, and then let's do something about it. Ito, siguro ang basa niya is may kinalaman yung criticism sa confidential fund dun sa declining numbers. So ito yung sinabi. Okay, baba na natin dito. Ito. Ito. Makinig kayo sa lahat ng sinasabi sa palibot nyo at tandaan nyo, kung sino man kumukontra sa confidential funds ay kumukontra sa kapayapaan. Kung sino ang kumukontra sa kapayapaan ay kalaban ng bayan. Those are very strong words. Kalaban ng bayan. Okay? That's very short. Medyo next level yan. Okay? Now, let's break this down. Let's break this down. Okay? Okay, let's break this down. First of all, you can see iba yung approach Diba? So, unit team, supposedly both of them come from similar ideological background, but you can see they're very actually different. No? Both of them saw double-digit declines, even more in the case of BBM. BBM as the president, the more powerful person, the commander-in-chief of the nation. Response niya, kalma lang, we get the message, we'll respond. Dito, immediately, tingnan what happened here. Immediately the confidential issue was turned in. So, okay, immediately what we see here is Ang tinatawag namin dito sa social sciences is securitization, right? So you immediately you make it a matter of national security, right? A matter of national security. And we know, by nature, when you turn an issue a matter of national security, automatically, that's gonna affect the parameters for pluralistic debate. Sa madaling salita, pag pinasok mo yung usapin national security, parang ang hirap kumontra, 'di ba? Kasi automatically ang mangyari diyan is makusa ka na kalaban ka ng bayan, 'di ba? So the terms of the debate suddenly are different level. The second thing we have to so first is the instinct to immediately securitize the issue. This is very digong. This is a very digong approach, right? You don't see that with Marcos Jr., right? At least comparatively. Considering that Marcos Jr. actually is the president, is dealing with some serious national security issues, is dealing with serious threats sa West Philippine Sea. Alright? Hindi yan trabaho ng DepEd. Okay? So one is the immediate instinct, almost automatic instinct to securitize an issue. And second is, diba? And second is to jump into, so parang immediately in-assume mo na yung mga nagkikriticize sa confidential fund ay kinikriticize yan dahil ayaw nila ng peace and order. That's quite a leap. So anyone who knows how to do basic analysis, no, logical analysis, no, textual analysis, contextual analysis, makikita niya na parang may mga may leaps dito. Anyone with some basic background in debate would know that that's quite a leap. Kasi it's very possible that you're attacking the confidential fund not because you're against peace and security, but precisely because you are for the most efficient way of dealing with peace and security. I.e., you want the confidential fund to go to the agencies which by nature are designed to deal with national security issue. Case in point, kung may problema tayo sa West Philippine Sea, pinag-usapan natin dyan ang ating Sandataan Lakas, ang Philippine Coast Guard, NICA, intelligence gathering, etc. Right? So it's very possible that criticize mo yung confidential fund precisely because you want confidential funds to be only for agencies which are by nature designed to deal with national security issue. Right? So that's a logical leap to assume that just because you're criticizing the confidential fund of, let's say, DepEd, you're against national security. And the third level is that completely dismissive itong mga sinasabi dito dun sa mga sinasabi ng katulad nila Senator Rizza Ontiveros, among many others, to put it mildly, na nagsabi, wait lang, actually, hindi lang concern dito yung whether the confidential fund for DepEd makes sense from a national security standpoint because after all, di ba sabi nila Digong nung panahon nila na paubos na yung NPA o wala na pala yung NPA, so bakit kailangan ng DepEd ng malaking confidential fund? But remember, the also concern here is transparency, right? So a lot of criticism here is is DepEd really the best agency to handle national security related matters and therefore to have such a large confidential fund? And pangalawa is the issue of transparency, right? The issue of transparency, right? Because ang dali na lahat na lang gawin natin confidential fund para wala nang tanong, di ba? So this is the concern we see here na there is a degree of dismissiveness here. Now, to be fair, I think we have to watch the whole speech to see the full context. But nevertheless, yun nga, nakikita natin na paulit-ulit itong ganitong tendency na yan. Again, let's just be fair. Again, let's look at the other things that Vice President Sara Duterte said. So, Vice President Sara Duterte also touted the DepEd's membership in the Anti-Terrorist Council, yung NTF, LCAC, etc. O, tanong niyo yung MMC. Sabi niya, let us recognize the vital role of confidential funds in ensuring the security and development of our nation. We must prioritize peace and order alongside education as they are foundation of a prosperous society. Okay, again, so she made this very strong argument na DepEd may role sa national security. And she reminded everyone na kasama sila sa Anti-Terrorist Council. Okay, I get it. But I think this is where na may kulang eh. What about yung argument na sana dapat binigay na lang ito more sa issues related to West Philippines, which is what the Congress is moving towards under Speaker Romualdez. And pangalawa, why the confidential fund has to be this large, right? When apparently paubos na yung NPA. And it's not like NPA is recruiting 4-year-old kids or 8-year-old kids or 12-year-old kids, right? their realm of activity traditionally is in universities, right? So, yun lang. So, I feel masyadong dismissive and masyadong securitized yung ganyang response. And again, this is where you see differences in temperament and approach. And this is where you can clearly see there is a continuity between the father and daughter. They have a tendency to immediately or to instinctively treat issues in a securitized way. So, yun yung difference nakita natin. I just felt it's worth looking at it. So again dun sa mga fans natin dyan, na sabi, oh, out of context, literally I'm putting the quote there, and I'm literally analyzing to what's the big picture here. A, the tendency to automatically securitize issue, and B, we see a degree of dismissiveness towards other concerns about confidential funds, whether it's best for DepEd to have it, whether DepEd should have such a big confidential fund, and whether it would not be better if we give it to other agencies na may kinalaman talaga sa national security in West Philippine Sea, and also the issue of transparency. Like, alam nga naman lahat na lang gawin natin confidential fund para wala nang usapan. And of course, I didn't even talk about the technical issues that was raised by Congressman Lagman among others, which is, and dun nga si Stella Kimbo naging na Stella, di ba? Which is, wait lang, bakit may allocation wala naman yung originally dun sa line items dun sa budget? So, there are also technicality issues with whether the procedures for General Appropriations Act, etc. were followed, right? So, yung GA, di ba? So, I just don't see any response to any of those issues. Right? I just see dismissiveness. And I just see like, oh, pag criticize mo yung confidential fund naman, ayaw mo sa peace and order. Like, hindi eh. Maraming mga nag-criticize that for other reasons. Now, I'm not saying all criticisms are coming from a good place. Of course, there's some people who just don't like her or don't want the Duterte there and they're criticizing her for the sake of criticism. Of course. But to dismiss all criticism as having insidious motivations or jumping to words like kalaban ng bayan, I don't know, that's quite a leap for me, to put it mildly, no? So ako, ang advice ko lang naman dito is, it always helps, if you show leadership. After all, you're the second highest elected office, official in the land. Just come out and said, hindi, ito kasing ginagawa namin, ito po yung challenge sa DepEd, ito po yung problema sa recruitment. Hindi lang yung generic dapat medyo more concrete evidence-based. I-explain no. Yes, DepEd, hindi po siya NICA. Yes, mahalagang West Philippine Sea. So yeah, you accept. Just like what BBM said, like, naintindihan ko, ganito, hindi ako surprised. So, dapat sana ganon. And then from there, you work it from there. And then from there, you say, ganito kasi, kailangan namin ng ganun kalaking fund kasi ganito kalaki yung you go out there and explain. Not your USEC, not your ASEC, not your spokesperson, not your whatever. Wala naman bloggers mukhang. You yourself, you go out there and explain it sa taong bayan, nicely. And doon naman sa issues ng transparency, again, you explain the law, you explain the context, you explain the intentions, etc. But at the same time, baka moot and academic na to dahil may moves na sa Congress at sa ating legislatura na talagang hindi na magbigay ng confidential fund siguro sa DepEd next year at ibibigay na ito sa mga West Philippine Sea related agencies like Philippine Coast Guard among others na napakaliit, di ba? Napakaliit yung kanilang confidential funds, no? Of course they have other funds, but if you're really gonna focus on national security, the first thing that comes to your mind is not DepEd. The second thing that comes to your mind is not DepEd. The seventh thing that comes to your mind is not DepEd. I can easily talk about all different agencies in government that need that fund. Philippine Coast Guard, Philippine Navy, NICA, PNP. I can go on and on about that, right? So, yun lang. So we're not saying there's no problem when it comes to national security, when it comes to DepEd. And perhaps in theory, it makes sense for them to have fund, but should it be this large, etc. So yung mga ganyan bagay, so sana lang ma-explain na mabuti. Now, I know na si Gibo, Secretary Gibo, was nice and said, yeah, may issues sila sa recruitment, etc. They need a fund. But this has to come from the Vice President herself, right? Not from Erwin Tulfo, not from Stella Kimbo, not from Gibo Chudoro. It has to come from herself. Because President Marcos Jr. himself came out and explained, gets ko, I understand, I'm not surprised, we're gonna do something about it. You see, that's what leaders do. Alright? That's how we approach it. On that note, thank you very much, mga kamets. Ito political strategy style tayo dyan. Hindi lang tayo facts. Hindi lang tayo analysis. Meron din tayo mga recommendations, policy recommendations. Again, I have my stance on issues. And just because naka-yellow tayo, naka-Brazil tayo, wag naman ganon. Alright, ang dami na tuloy ang naman na, parang pag nilagay mo word ng mga dilawan ganon, automatically na, nasa-sensor na ngayon ng Facebook ha. Okay, anyway, parang na-miss ko rin color na to. It's been a while since nagdilaw tayo. But go ahead, sige lang. Bash na naman tayo. Alam niyo naman tama ako eh. Tama naman talaga tayo eh. So, ganun talaga. Alright, on that note, maraming salamat. Kain na tayo at I know you wanna watch other things. Alright, on that note, thank you very much. Maraming salamat sa lahat ng mga sumusuporta sa atin. Bukas, pag-usapan naman natin something different. Break muna tayo sa politics. Pag-usapan naman natin ang basketball. Basketball, let's talk about it. For the gold, for the GOG Philippines. Sana naman mag-top G. Top G level na tayo bukas. Alright, on that note, thank you very much guys. God bless and talk to you soon.